What's on your mind following the Mariners' busy day this past Friday? We'll answer some of your questions coming up here on Mailbag Monday. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Monday, January 8th, 2024. This is Titan Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today over at jacemedical.com. That's Jase Medical.com. And use the promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. Again, that's JASEmedical.com. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. It is Mailbag Monday, the show where we answer your Mariners questions. Let's see what you want to know. Max is going to kick us off here with a two-parter. First, if the M's are going to go after one more bat, are they looking for infield or outfield help? Second, where would you say is the more likely route we use for that player? Free agency or trade?
Yeah, so according to Rosenthal in his update this morning, it looks like they would be the infield is where the Mariners would prefer to add their bat. I think they can't really afford to be that picky. So if the best bat that is available to them that they can acquire is an outfielder, I think you just got to, bite that bullet and add that bat. So but yeah, I think ideally it's an infielder because you kind of do have like one open bench spot right now. So in theory, if you can get a second or third baseman and, kind of force a platoon between Urias and Rojas, it puts one of those guys on the bench on a daily basis, which is probably the best build for your ball club. So I think ideally they want it to be in the infield. I think it makes sense for it to be in the infield.
Yeah.
I just don't think there's that many bats available that can play in the infield that make a ton of sense for Seattle. So at the end of the day, you need the bat more than you need the specific position.
Yeah.
So, you get the best hitter you can. My belief is that the preference would be infield. And when you kind of look around at what's available in free agency in terms of infield bats, there are none, literally none. So
I mean, we're talking about Ahmed Rosario, we're talking about Adam Frazier, Whit Merrifield. Those are the kinds of players you're talking about. Now,
let me know when we hit a 100 WRC plus guy.
Yeah. Now
Tim
maybe
Anderson.
that is what they're sniffing around, right? Maybe that's what they feel they want to add as like kind of an insurance policy for Urias or Rojas rather than like an actual legitimate 115-ish WRC plus bat, which again, if you're going to get that guy, you got to go on the trade market because they're not going to sign Matt Chapman. That's the only player that I can think of on the market, on the free agent market, that is like that guy, right? Or like at least you're hoping that he's that guy, right? A couple players that come to mind here. Jorge Polanco is a very obvious answer to this because the Twins have outright said they need to shed payroll. He's the most obvious, along with Max Kepler, the most obvious solution to their problem on that front. But you're also not going to be the only bidder. Obviously the Twins don't have a ton of leverage, but you're not going to be the only bidder in that market if that is a player that the Mariners are actually interested in, and I think they should be. You put Polanco at second, you're going to get, I feel pretty confident about Polanco giving you a 115 WRC plus 2-ish win season at second base. You can move Urias and Rojas over to third, which is where they profile better. And that's probably the most optimal look for your roster. The other guy is Willy Adames. I don't know what that would cost. He's making a pretty good chunk of change though with the Brewers. The Brewers haven't really sold off the way that I expected them to so far this offseason. We'll see if that maybe changes over the next few weeks. Not really sure what the Brewers are doing right now specifically. But Adames, like he's like, optimally speaking, we've talked about Adames in the past. Like he should probably be your shortstop. JP should probably be your second baseman, but that's ultimately up to JP. And I don't think JP would want to move off his shortstop, especially for a guy that only has 1 year in Adames. So Adames is probably playing second or third for you. But those are really the two like impact bats that I can think of that would slot in at either third or second on the trade market.
If you consider Adames an impact bat,
right?
30 home runs, but also sub 300 on base. So
right,
kind of a up in the air there. But yeah, there's just not a lot of guys, unfortunately. So you start listing off some of the possibilities, and it's real easy to write a script where Urias and Rojas are just better than those guys. So it's a really tight, window, a really tight, needle to thread for Jerry Dipoto in that regard. I would, barring health, Jeff McNeil is a guy who could make some sense. I don't know if he can play the field this year though. He did have elbow surgery, so you have to wait and see there. And then also going back down to San Francisco, JD Davis is a pretty interesting guy. Who's coming off of kind of a mediocre year, but traditionally has hit very well and is actually okay at third base. Not terrible. Greatly improved there last year. So there are a few guys, just not a ton. And like, it's not going to be like Jose Ramirez, right? So
no.
You're not getting a star. So I think you just got to take the best bat you can get, but I do think it's more likely than not going to be on the trade market if they are to acquire a impact infield bat. It's going to be on the trade market.
This question comes from an anonymous asker. I've seen comments / articles that the M's have had the best offseason of all the AL West teams before the Friday trades. What is your opinion on that assumption, considering both acquisitions and departures for all the teams? Have the M's had the best offseason to date? They've had the busiest offseason to date of all the AL West teams. The AL West team, like the AL West, hasn't done really anything. Like the Astros signed Victor Caratini. Have the Angels done anything?
Not that I know of. Not that I can recall. Maybe they signed a reliever or something.
The Rangers have presumably going to lose Jordan Montgomery. Am I missing anything there?
Maybe a bullpen arm, but nothing of like serious impact. The Angels have had something.
Yeah, the Rangers added someone to the bullpen, I believe. I can't remember who. The A's traded for Abraham Toro. But yeah. So now, like, does that necessarily equate to having the best offseason? I don't know. They've made a lot of moves, right? They have made a lot of moves, but as evidenced by this show, quantity doesn't necessarily equal to quality.
Speak for yourself. So they had the Angels acquired Adam Kolarek.
Okay.
They traded Jaime Barria or lost him on a minor league deal. They acquired Willie Calhoun on a minor league deal. They traded Max Stassi and David Fletcher for Evan White. How could we forget that?
Right. Yep.
Signed Jake Marisnick to a minor league deal, Luis Garcia to a 1-year contract, Adam Simber to a 1-year contract, and Zach Plesac to a 1-year contract.
Right. They got Plesac.
So not a lot. Texas has lost Perez and Garver. They signed Diego Castillo to a minor league deal. They signed Austin Hedges to a 1-year deal. Oh no, they lost Austin Hedges. Sorry. They lost Chris Stratton. They signed Tyler Mahle. And
right. But Mally's not going to factor into their 2024 plans. So
they've added Mahle and Yates.
Right. Yeah. Then I think the Astros, all they've done is Caratini. They lost Maldonado, so they basically swapped those two guys out for one another. Yeah, that's about it as far as I'm aware there. And then the A's, who cares?
Yeah,
who cares? We're going to be answering more of your questions in just a moment, but first, a reminder: this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. All right, Sailors, the NFL regular season may be over, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. And the app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays, You can also find bets in the new Explore tab and make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. It's the best way to find popular parlays. While the Seahawks are done, Mariners baseball is almost here, folks. So is betting on Mariners baseball. But while you wait for the boys to take the field, you can still bet on the Kraken and Huskies basketball. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn, that's LOCKEDON, and make your first bet a layup. Again, that is FanDuel.com/LockedOn, LOCKEDON. FanDuel, official partner of the National Football League. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. And as a reminder, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get back into your questions here on Mailbag Monday. Chad wants to know, seeing talks about us still being interested in Soler. Does having an elite rotation make it possible to go after guys that don't fit as well defensively, or is that not how this works? Wondering if the addition to our offense would be a net positive given how good our rotation is. Colby?
I think run prevention is a team stat. So as good as the Mariners pitching is, it's also not a pitching staff that's going to strike out 18 guys a game, right? Like they're going to put the ball in play, and T-Mobile Park in particular, balls put in play need to be converted to outs. So because it's hard to score runs there. So I wonder with a guy specifically like Soler, if you're just giving up as many runs as you're getting by signing him, which would make him a net zero. And, plays that aren't made add to pitch count. They add to ERA. They add to high stress pitches. They lower innings. Like not making plays that you should make, they have a snowball effect, right? You face more hitters. Obviously, pitchers, they have to throw more pitches. They get tired quicker, more stress on the bullpen, blah, 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 blah. So run prevention is kind of a team statistic in a lot of ways. So I don't think that you can just completely say like, oh, we had this great starting pitching staff and a pretty good bullpen, so we can just say screw defense. Like, no, you still have to play good D. So Soler's continued Seattle's continued interest in Soler, reported continued interest in Soler. I don't think makes any sense as the roster is constructed right now. Could it make sense? Sure. I just don't see how it gets there. And I don't know if I trust Soler's bat enough to live with the high probability of negative run prevention impact on the back end. Because if he's going to cost me, 20 runs by being an everyday left fielder, is he going to make that up over Luke Raley or Dom Canzone or whoever the other left fielder is offensively? Maybe he might, but I think it'd be pretty close to a wash.
Or even relative to like Tom Pham, Adam Duvall.
Whoever it is.
They're still in the mix for another like corner outfield type, right?
Right. So Soler's a tricky one. I don't want to forego defense, particularly if I'm going to use Haniger and Canzone in right field a ton. Like they're not very good. I don't want two bad defenders flanking Julio, as good as Julio is.
This means one of two things, right? Soler's actually going to play a bit of outfield for you, or Mitch Garver is going to play quite a bit of first base for you. And
neither of those is a good idea.
That comes with a lot of issues on its own as well. So I just you can make it work in terms of just like putting the pieces in place, but in terms of it actually benefiting you in the end overall,
sure.
The
Phillies have made it work.
The Phillies have made it work, right? But it's a roster build that would make Jack Z shed a tear for sure. I'll say that, of joy for sure. But I don't know if that's particularly the best fit for this ball club, because essentially it's a robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? You're robbing your defense to extract as much offense as possible.
Right. Which could work. I mean,
and again, that might signal such a great belief in your rotation that you can mask some of the defensive issues through your rotation.
Sure. I also think the signing of Soler in particular probably wipes out your budget. I think you're done at that point, which means no pitching.
Yeah.
So I don't see the fit unless you're trading Ty France, unless that's the goal. And even then, Rayleigh's going to play first base, and so you take your second best defensive outfielder and you put him in the infield.
Yeah, the money aspect is the other real key here. I mean, you could definitely backload it in theory and use some of that money that you freed up in 2025 and 2026 with Ray deal to help pay for Soler. Maybe you even, do some Dodgers stuff where you defer some money and all that. Who knows? Maybe there's a possibility here where you can get Soler at like $12 million in 2024 because like Teoscar's deal, right? Teoscar's deal is essentially like 15, right? If you take out the $8.5 million in deferred money over the decade in the 2030s. So you're kind of looking at like a $15 million AAV. If Soler's kind of working off of that, maybe you can get him to like 12 or even 10 in the first year. But I don't know.
Listen, I don't see a fit. Honestly,
it feels like we're trying to put a square peg into a round hole here with Soler. Which like if they get him, awesome, cool, great. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about all the ways that they can make that work and all that. And ultimately, you're getting a great bat. Like the lineup gets better with Jorge Soler, but is your roster overall better? Or does your roster overall benefit from that? We'll cross that bridge if we ever get to it. Anyway, let's move on. Got another question here from David. David wants to know, if the Mariners were to only add 2 new players this offseason, do you agree another infielder and reliever would make the most sense for depth? If you agree and free agency was the only option, what players should they target?
I think that's what's most ideal. Like an ideal scenario would be that, but you kind of contradict yourself when you say you can only use free agency to get those guys. Because if I'm only allowed to use free agency, then no, I would say outfield and relief pitcher is the best way or the best, ideal way to get that. So, but in general, yes, I think an infielder and a reliever, a good reliever would be the route I would go. Again, if I'm only allowed to use free agency, was there a budget restriction on there? I can't remember.
I mean, I think we should work within the confines that have
like 10 to 15 million.
Well, yeah, because all right, so Divish wrote an article, I believe yesterday, that the Mariners very well may have a hard cap for the entire season of $145 million. So, if Darren Gosler's spreadsheet is correct, that they basically have committed about $121 million. They have roughly $24 million to play with for the rest of the whole year.
That includes the trade deadline and all that.
That includes the deadline. And so I think at most you probably need to set aside like $8 to $10 million. But the other thing too with that is like, that's also assuming that you're going to be competitive enough to add, to make trades, to add payroll at the deadline.
They're going to be. So yeah, if I can only use free agency, I want to save $4 or $5 million at least. Like Stevenson's probably like the guy that I'd go get, but he's probably going to cost 12-ish million. So can I go get an infielder for $3 million? Like,
the other weird thing with that too, right, is like the reliever market got off to such a hot start and guys were getting paid. Like Craig Kimbrell got 13 mil from the Orioles and a couple other guys got paid. Like Emilio Pagan got a nice deal.
Lopez got like 12 million a year.
Ronaldo Lopez got a nice deal. That's also because they think that he can start a little bit. But yeah, like Pierce Johnson like kicked off the offseason with like 8 per, so but then it's the reliever market has just come to kind of a screeching halt despite Josh Hader still being out there, Robert Stevenson still being out there. A couple of really nice arms are still available, and they just haven't found teams yet for one reason or the other. So, does Stevenson still even make $12 million per?
I mean,
if I had to guess, probably, but I don't know. I don't know what the hang up is there.
Yeah, you might be able to backload it, also and options and all that stuff. So, because of how thin the infield market is, I would prefer that they dump most of their money onto a guy like Stevenson and then go and get like Gio or Shella. If you want more of a balanced approach, I still like Jacob Junis. And then it's like, okay, if he costs 5 or 6, what do I spend the other $7-8 million on? Like, is there an infielder out there that's worth that? Not really. There really isn't. I mean, like Tim Anderson, if you want to take a shot on the upside, maybe.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of downside there too. And Whit Merrifield hasn't been a league average hitter for 3 years. But he, does bring some athleticism, and he could play the outfield also, which is a bonus. So I think if I'm doing like based on what's available to me, because I can only use free agency, I would go top market with my relief pitcher, which would be Stevenson, and then I would just go and grab a Urshela type.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do more of a balanced approach, I guess I would say like Junis and Merrifield would probably be my preference. But it's like you're picking between.
I'd rather just maximize the value of the reliever, and then if I'm getting an infielder, it's
like I'd rather have Polanco.
Adam Frazier.
Yeah, I mean, pick one of the bad infield bats that are out there. There's a ton of them. Yeah. Ahmad Rosario. But I think for me, like if I had the trade market available to me, then I would probably prioritize like Polanco and then like Junis. I'd rather have that than Stevenson and Urshela.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. But yeah, just free agency. I'm spending most of that on the relief pitcher because that's where the value is.
All right, we got some more of your questions coming up here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Jase Medical. So I know we look to sports to escape from some of the, the crazy realities of real life. But can we talk just for a minute about actually preparing for real life? Because according to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. This is terrifying stuff, quite frankly. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than, for example, if a loved one of mine got sick while a supply chain issue was all that was keeping them from the life-saving medication they needed. But thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics that treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including stuff like, UTIs, respiratory infections, skin infections, and many others. And this stuff could happen to any of us. That's just the reality of it. So visit jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular costs. It has never been more important to be prepared than it is today. So go to jasemedical.com. Again, that is JASE medical.com, and use the promo code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen here on Mailbag Monday. Colby is really out of focus for some reason. I don't know what's going on with your camera. You got super out of focus during that second segment. All right, let's get back into your questions here. Stockton wants to know which 3 players from the farm will most likely help this season. I think we kind of have to include Prolander Baroa in this because he's barely pitched at the major league level. Still a prospect. So Prolander Baroa. He has the highest upside of any young reliever in the Mariners organization right now to be kind of that third high leverage arm behind Matt Brash and Andres Munoz, which Rosenthal mentioned in his article today is something that the Mariners are looking for. They're looking for another guy to help out there in the back end of the bullpen with Topa and Brash and Munoz. So Baroa is definitely the first guy that I think of. I think there's a pretty decent shot that you can get Jose Caballero level production out of someone like Ryan Bliss at some point this year. And I think he's barely close-ish, like close enough where, we could feasibly see him in like May. Tyler Locklear, I think, is going to get a shot at some point this season. I don't know when that'll be, but I know that the Mariners hold him in a very high regard. So there's 3 guys right there. I'll also throw in Zach DeLoach. I know he's probably going to get an opportunity at some point over the course of this upcoming season. He might even have a shot, outside shot to make the opening day roster. That's just a solid. The upside there, or the hope there, is solid 4th outfielder, left-handed hitting 4th outfielder, 5th outfield type. So, and that can that could be useful, right? Even if it's just for a couple weeks. I mean, we saw how useful Cade Marlowe was when he went into God mode for 2 weeks. Right? So even if you just get that out of Zach DeLoach, that would be helpful, depending on what your situation is. So yes, for 3, I gave you 4. Is there anyone else that I didn't mention, Colby?
Yeah, so I wasn't paying attention. So I'm going to say Ryan Bliss at some point. Prolando Barroa, like you said, obviously, is kind of the obvious one.
Oh, so you were paying attention.
Sure. I mean, like I just assumed because that was so obvious.
Right.
And then DeLoach is probably a guy. He's on the 40-man, so that gives him a huge leg up in that regard. One name I'd throw out there is kind of like could be a sneaky bullpen ad in the middle of the year. Jimmy Joyce is kind of making some waves. But yeah, it's not going to be a great year where, or at least on paper, it's not going to be a great year where like these prospects are going to come up and save you, quote unquote, if something goes wrong.
Right.
You're just not quite there yet. Next year is the year where you could start to see Cole Young and Harry Ford. And, some of the bigger names, Tyler Lockett, they might make a debut this year, but I wouldn't say that you should, count on them to come up and help.
Right.
So yeah, for me, it's Marlowe, it's DeLoach, it's Bliss, it's Barroa, and then maybe Jimmy Joyce, somebody like that could come up and help you. But we talk about all those guys, and yet when the Mariners really needed it last year, who was it that stepped up? It was Jose Caballero of all people.
Right.
So you never really know who's going to do it, but I feel like it's Barroa, Bliss, DeLoach, Locklear, like one of those. Marlowe, technically, I think Marlowe graduate prospect status.
Not too sure.
He was close, but either way, it'll be one of those guys.
It doesn't feel like he got 150.
I think he got 100 at least, though, so he might have.
Yeah. But yeah, and then, there's obviously like the very outside shot that Cole Young just has an insane year, and he just kind of forces the Mariners' hand at some point in like August. But again, we'll cross that bridge if we ever get to it. So next question here from Anonymous. What makes an injury-prone player an injury-prone player? I know some players get injured way more than others, but why is that? Injuries are accidents, so what makes them more frequent in some players? Is it a level of caution or something more? It could be a conditioning issue, right? Could be an overworking of oneself. There's a lot of things that it could be on that front. But then there's also guys that just experience a ton of freak injuries, like Mitch Haniger, right? Gets hit in the face, gets hit in the like a lot of stuff has happened to Mitch Haniger. A lot of injuries have occurred with things that have been completely out of Haniger's control. But he's still technically an injury prone player because he keeps on getting hurt. It just keeps on happening, whether it's his fault or not. Or there's like Ty France, right? Who like he crowds the plate. He's going to get hit by pitches. And that significantly increases your chances of getting hurt. Right. And as we've seen over the last few years, Ty France has at one point or another gotten hurt.
Yep. Most of it is bad luck, I think. But there are guys who constantly have, like soft tissue, hamstring and all that stuff, back issues. A lot of that could be just, how they work out, like their routines and all that stuff. Because, baseball in general is just a very like, we say it all the time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So if you're not conditioned properly, and it's such a unique sport because there's movements that you make in baseball that you don't make in any other sport. So I think most of it is just about bad luck. But like you said, with guys like Ty France, he crowds the plate, so he's going to get hit more. That's just how it works. Anthony Rizzo crowds the plate. He's going to get hit more. And if you get hit with a lot of baseballs, eventually, you're going to catch one off the wrist or the knuckle or the thumb or whatever, and that's going to hurt you. So it's different for every player. I would say most of the time, an injury prone player, it's just about bad luck. Sometimes it's conditioning, like how they work out, and they're not doing a baseball specific type of workout routine, but mostly it's bad luck, and it's, it's bad luck, and it's just how you play the game. Sometimes you play the game a little more recklessly, you're going to run into walls and stuff like that. You're going to get hurt more. So I would say
if you're very aggressive, if you're going to like slide into first and stuff like that, like,
that's the risk you run. So,
and that kind of ties into the whole like Ty France batting stance thing, right? Like him crowding the plate.
He leans over the plate. Yeah.
It's a choice, that he makes to give him an advantage, right?
Right. And he's probably not ever going to change that. So
Yeah.
he's going to have to deal with getting hit by more pitches. So mostly bad luck, but there is sometimes it's an offshoot of the way you designed your, how you play the game.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Last question of the day comes from Jason. Assuming health, who is our opening day starting pitcher? Did Kirby earn that? Does spring training have a big impact on that decision? No, spring training does not have an impact on that. It's usually usually seniority. I mean, we've seen that in the past with like Felix, even towards the tail end of Felix's career where he was not good. He would still get the opening day nod.
It's going to be Castillo.
Yeah, it's going to be Castillo. Castillo's the vet in the rotation. He was the opening day starter last year. He is. I mean, you ask anyone who's the best pitcher in the Mariners rotation, I think a lot are going to say that it's Luis Castillo. I think there's definitely debate on that front, but like I think a lot of people will just their first thought will be Luis Castillo. It makes a lot of sense for it to be Luis.
Yeah, it's not like Gilbert and Kirby were so much better than Castillo that they've earned that over Luis. It'll be Luis. I mean,
he was a top 5 Cy Young vote finisher.
Sure.
Vote getter.
It's going to be Luis, Gilbert, Kirby in some order, but Luis will be number 1.
All right. That's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Petnode, I'm Ty Dane Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dane Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.